Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here again with another review for you. This time I'm talking about episode 2 of season 1 of Arrow called Honor Thy Father. I gotta say, I continue to be really impressed with this show. It's not quite there yet, but it seems to be well on its way to finding a good equilibrium between the sort of the comic book elements that the story naturally comes from and the sort of grounded in the real world Christopher Nolan Batman movies that it's also aiming for. Now, I don't think that balance has been found just yet, as I've said, but I think that as each episode goes by, they're finding a more of a way to balance it out. And I think this is made clearest in the way that narration is used in this episode. Now, again, that was one of the things that I mentioned last time around, that was how the narration was something that if it was in a comic book it would sound pretty good, but hearing it come out of the mouth of a real person in a fairly realistic setting, it seems, well, just a little bit too cheesy. Now, we do get more dialogue that's very much in that same vein. Again, this would sound great if it was a caption narration in a comic book, but again, this is something that's coming out of a real actor's mouth, and as such, it sounds slightly cornball. But we're getting a lot less of it, and naturally we would get more of it in the pilot. But what we are seeing is still, even if it does sound a little cheesy, well written, if you're willing to go with it a little bit, and does really help establish the tone, gives us some insight into what's going on in Oliver's head. Now, one of the rules that people are supposedly taught in film school, and this has apparently been going on for a while, is that the use of voiceover is to be avoided. Now, I've personally never agreed with that line of thinking. I think voiceover is simply a tool that any film or television maker can use and can use effectively so long as they know what they're doing with it. And I think the people that make Arrow know what they're doing with voiceover. They're using, now as I said, in the pilot it makes sense that there would be more of it, but here they're using just enough of it to give us that comic book sense, but not have it be so overwhelming that the cheese gets too much. I guess is quite simply the best way to put it. So I do have to give the show a good bit of credit for that. But anyway, there's a lot going on this episode, and a lot I want to talk to you guys about with. So let's dive right into it. Let's start off with let's start talking about the characters then, and we'll talk about the plot in a little while. And I suppose we might as well start off talking about Dig. Diggle. I'm just going to call him Dig because that's shorter. Okay, first of all, this guy really, in this episode, really proves his chops. This guy is a genuine badass. He's able to go in there and take down 2 Chinese triad assassins, and then he gets into a fight with China White. Now, granted, he does pretty much lose that fight and would have been killed if it wasn't for Oliver. But the guy did hold his own against a professional assassin for a while, and let's face it, that's better than you or I could probably ever hope to do. So this establishes Dig's credentials in the good old-fashioned sense of show don't tell. That yeah, he's a badass, and while he might be surrounded by people who are even more skilled than he is not a person to be underestimated, and he can hold his own to at least a reasonable degree in the circumstances that he's surrounded by. So this puts him on a much more even footing with Oliver. And not just his combat skills. It's obvious that Dig is catching on that Oliver's a little bit more than he lets on. And again, this makes, 1, it elevates Dig as a character, and 2, it introduces complications and problems for Oliver. All of which are hallmark examples of good storytelling in this episode. And honestly, I just like Dig. He seems like the sort of person that if I were in this situation, I'd want a guy like that around. Now, not everything in relation to Dig is all wine and roses. Now, you remember last episode, he caught Oliver trying to sneak out of the party and was basically going to escort him back in. Oliver fakes the door being locked. Dig sort of bends over to try and get it open himself, and then Oliver does the Vulcan nerve pinch on him or whatever, and knocks him out. Now, Oliver was realistically the only person who could have possibly done that to him. What in the world was Dig thinking when he woke up from that? It's like, I mean, did he think like, oh, gee, what an inconvenient moment I happen to choose to pass out for no discernible reason? And again, not one word is made of that in this episode. It's really ridiculous. But I mean, honestly, when I was watching that episode last week, I was really looking forward to some sort of acknowledgement of what happened there. A part of me even wondered if Oliver wasn't going to have to bribe Dig to just kind of forget about that or something. But no, not one word is made of that, and I won't lie, that to me is a rather noticeable strike against what is otherwise a fairly good episode. And let's see. I think that's really all that I have to say about Dig. So let's move on to talk about Thea. First of all, I really did like what we got from Thea this time around. She's really starting to come out as her own character to establish why it is she's there, other than to kind of maybe give us Speedy down the line. She does introduce some genuine, what's the word I'm looking for? Again, I don't know if angst is exactly the word we're looking for, but Oliver needs more than his mother in terms of a family to deal with. And since his father's dead, giving him a sister is really genuinely a good idea. I know some people have been very against the character being there. I'm fine with it. And here we get to see a little bit more detail, and Thea did touch upon this before, about what it was really like for her to be without her brother, about the pain that she went through. And that scene with her, standing by her father and her brother's phony graves and explaining to Oliver that she felt closer to him when she thought he was dead than now when he's alive, that's some really nice writing there. That's some good acting, that's some good drama, and, gee, talk about another knife in the gut for poor Oliver, huh? Now, of course, the question here is, actually, I don't know if that's really the question, is, first of all, Oliver, I understand you're going through a lot of stuff, like stuff that, nobody around you really gets. And I'll talk some more about that in a few minutes. But seriously, dude, give your sister a hug. I mean, really, she's right there. She's obviously emotionally upset. Just give her a hug so that she has a clue that you're still in there somewhere and that you still give a damn. Oh, and while you're at it, why don't you go and tell your mom that your sister's taking drugs? If she can hire a bodyguard to follow you around, even though, okay, granted, somebody tried to kidnap you, but I think she could probably rustle up the cash to have somebody keep an eye on her daughter to make sure that their daughter doesn't die die from an overdose of ecstasy or something. Now, granted, this would not exactly endear you to your sister, but it beats having her OD and die or get addicted to drugs or something horrible like that. But oh boy, Oliver Queen can go out there and be a violent vigilante and kill people, but heaven forbid he should be a tattletale. Okay, and as long as we're talking about the Queen family, let's move on and talk about Moira. Not really a whole lot to say for her this time around. Apart from the fact that she apparently sabotaged her husband's boat and was apparently cool with the possibility of her husband and son, and at least 2 innocent people dying. And she showed up to give Diggle some BS for a while, but meh. Now, I'm not really complaining about Oliver's mom as a character. She's somebody who obviously is important. She clearly has some very important secrets. She's clearly going to be very important to the mythology of the show. But beyond her thing of secretly being evil, possibly, or most likely, and her, feelings towards Oliver, there's really... I don't really think we have a good sense of her yet. It's evil conspiracy stuff. Oliver, and that's about all we've really gotten from her character, other than the fact that she's married to Walter. So I don't think Moira has really truly emerged as a character yet. So with that said, I guess we should wrap things up with the Queen family and talk about what's going on with Oliver this episode. Now, as I said, I did like the scenes with him and his sister. It really twisted the knife. It really gave us some insight into what's going on with them right now. Thea, out of everybody around him, I think may be the one who who's caught on the most to just how emotionally messed up Oliver is. But with that said, let's talk about his relationship with Laurel here. Now, I do like that they had him kind of go back and immediately apologize for him being a dick last episode. One of the things that's concerning me about watching the show is just how heavily they're going to lift from the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. Now, the scene in the second one where Bruce, I'm pretty sure it was the second one, where Bruce, acts all drunk and insults the people at his dad's at the party in Wayne Manor. That was a great scene. It was wonderfully well done. It was really in keeping with what was going on in that movie. But what we saw last episode with him being a dick to Laurel just seemed a little too much like that. And I was honestly really worried that they were just going to have him go around being the obnoxious, drunken party boy, and that was how he was going to get away with it. First of all, I mean that's Batman's thing. That's what Bruce Wayne does. Here, they did sort of hint at the first episode, and I think that was a little bit of a red herring. Here, we get a very clear idea of just how it is that Oliver is going to deal with the Queen Industries side of the things. And the idea that he's just so emotionally messed up from this thing that he went through that he can't handle it, that, frankly, makes more sense than just about anything else that I can think of. And he even went out at the press conference and said, I'm not the man, I'm not my father, I can't be him, I can't take over, just step in immediately to his shoes. None of you understand what I'm going through right now. Basically kind of tells everybody to shove off. And it is funny that, in a way, in order to protect his secret identity, he really had to show his true feelings. So much of what we see with superheroes is them hiding and pretending and lying about what's going on. Here, Oliver is able to protect his secret identity simply by telling the truth. And in that way, and you could kind of see it in her expression, he's able to even become closer to Thea through this. As I said, she's the one who's really the closest to understanding emotionally just what it is he's going through. So yeah, that was a really nicely well done scene. I was really worried that Oliver was just going to show up there acting all drunk and this was just going to be, Bruce Wayne 101. But the show surprised me in what they did there, and I really like that. I love it when shows surprise me in a good way. Now, going back to what's going on with him and Laurel. I did like that scene with him and her at the apartment. This is where we sort of get some insight into just what it is that Laurel might have seen in Oliver all those years ago. Then again, it's sort of been made obvious that she's also pretty much having no strings attached sex with Tommy, so the possibility that Laurel might just also kind of go for the bad party boy type, I don't think that's quite off the table just yet. But I think we need to get to see a little bit more of what Oliver was like back in the old days before we can get a really clear sense of it all. But his reaction, Quentin's reaction to him, kind of hints that while Oliver may have had some deeper things going on back then, obnoxious, drunken, rich boy was still number one on his list of personality modes. But as I said, the scene with him and Laurel were really well done. They were very genuinely emotional. You could really see how these two people were able to form a very serious connection, and why this current situation is just so incredibly painful for both of them. Now, I'm sure there are some people out there who are, yelling their heads off about how Laurel freaked out and she ran and she was, really basically Oliver and Dig had to protect her when the Triad assassins and China White showed up. For the love of God, she is not Black Canary yet. She has not even taken really the first steps, apart from her sense of justice, towards being Black Canary. And honestly, that's good. If Oliver had come back and she was already a freaking vigilante, then well, there's a whole load of character development and stories just thrown out the window. It's basically falling from the sky that she's already this established vigilante, even if she doesn't have superpowers. I mean, really, just expecting her to be that way at the very start of the show, that's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it took 5 years for Oliver to become what he became. And, okay, I've made my point. There's no point in me ranting about it anymore. But anyway, let's I guess we're talking about the Lance family now. Let's talk about Quentin since I mentioned him. First of all, I gotta say I love Paul Blackthorne as Quentin Lance. Last episode, he was basically joking about Oliver being kidnapped in front of his family, which is a horrible thing to do. Grossly unprofessional for a police officer. I mean, if Moira had picked up the phone and called the police station to file an official complaint, he could have gotten in some real trouble there. But here we get to see him as a much more well-rounded character. The fact that his desire to protect Laurel, I mean, this poor guy is really just about out of his mind with worry. And given what's happened, it's hard to really fault him for this. But in his interplay with Laurel, we really get to see a lot of where she gets it from. That determination, that sharp wit. She really is in many ways a real chip off the old block. And I love the fact that she even gets her dad by throwing his own words back at him. And in a way, this is an interesting counterpoint to what we have going on with Oliver. Laurel and her father are both good guys on the side of what is right. They both believe in using the law to bring justice to the city. While Oliver and his mom, Oliver, for all his flaws, at the end of the day, Oliver's a good guy. And Oliver's mom, well, I think it's a little too early in to call her a bad guy, but she certainly doesn't seem like a hero. So it's hard to imagine that this is not going to come to a head at some point, come into conflict between them at some point. But here, with the Lances, we see just the genuine family dynamic of people, clashing over the desire to see their loved ones kept safe. And that's really what's going on here. Now, the clash between Oliver and his mom, well, that's a little harder to peg down at this point. And I really kind of hate to go there, but I can't really think of a better way to phrase it based on what we know at the moment. But that looks more like to be a clash between good and evil. Now, is Oliver's mom evil? Somehow, I don't think it's going to be that clear cut. I mean, given what his father told him at the end of the previous episode, I think there's going to be some seriously morally gray stuff going on here. But, that's stuff for later on. Now, yes. Before we continue on, let's talk about China White. Now, in terms of characterization, we really didn't get much of anything from her. We're told she's a badass Triad assassin. Okay, well, that's well and good. She certainly can't fight. She's enough to take down Dig, and he's a pretty capable guy. And she and Oliver are able to fight each other on a fairly even level, which makes her an interesting and exciting villain in that regard. But she has, you can count the number of lines she has I'm pretty sure you can count the number of lines you had that she had on your fingers and still on your hands and still have fingers to spare. And some of those lines weren't even in English. Not that I'm complaining, but as long as we're going there, why does she, talk smack to Green Arrow in Chinese when she has no reason to think that he speaks Chinese? Now, granted, it's entirely possible that she could have just been angry and slipped, but frankly, it seems to me that the real reason that happened is just so that we can show off the fact that Oliver, in addition to Russian, now also speaks Chinese. Okay. Now, of course, China White is a character from the Green Arrow Year One comics. I've mentioned that those are a big influence on what it is that we're seeing here on Arrow. Sadly, I have not had the opportunity to read those comics, so I can't really comment on how accurate she is in her portrayal. But I will say, I really don't think they could have made a better choice as to who to play her than Kelly Hu. Now, this is a lady with just a pretty astonishing, if you look at it, amount of superhero experience under her belt. She was Lady Deathstrike in the second X-Men movie. She's has a little bit of has even more experience of playing Asian assassin ladies, given that she's Cheshire and Cheshire's mom she's the voice of Cheshire and Cheshire's mom over on Young Justice. And even though it's not related to that, she was also the voice of Vistus Mar in Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, which is an absolutely fantastic game. I love KOTOR 2. I love it so much. Such a great game. So yeah, great choice in terms of casting there, and not a bad wig either. Somebody with such a look that's so unlikely in the real world, it's not an easy thing to pull off. So I'll give the costume department for a pretty decent, you did the best that you could. I'll give them that. Now let's talk about a few things. First of all, I like that Summers in this episode gets in Quentin's face and goes like, hey, isn't you investigating this crime a conflict of interest? And I talked about this a little bit in the last episode, and I'm glad somebody at least acknowledges this. Of course, then Quentin offers some, BS reason, which just ultimately amounts to, I'm a badass cop, I get to do whatever I want. Yeah, somehow I don't think the law really works like that. And speaking of the law, one thing that I do know about the law is that if a violent lunatic attacks you with a weapon and makes you confess to a crime, records it, and then hands it over to the police, there is no way on God's green earth that is going to be treated as admissible evidence in a court case. Okay? You are not allowed to admit confessions obtained by coercion. And somebody pointing a weapon at you and saying, fess up or I'll kill you, kind of falls under coercion. I mean, this is absolutely laughable that they expect us to buy this. But, we have to have our happy ending, right? Boy. Hey, and speaking of BS, I'm pretty sure that if you get shot with an arrow, you are not going to be knocked back several feet, okay? An arrow it's not a car. If you get hit by a car, you're going to go flying. If you get hit by an arrow, you're not. Okay, this is like in the movies where somebody gets hit with a gun and gets knocked all the way across the room. Guns don't work that way. A bullet is a tiny little piece of lead. It does not have the power behind it to carry a human body several feet. It has the power to go through a human body. I mean, I know I'm this is sort of like complaining that in an action movie, 20 guys can shoot at the hero with machine guns and not a single one of them hit him. This is just the staple of the action genre. It's done to make the action scenes seem cool and exciting. And again, I'm not going to sit here and complain that I'm in any way, shape, or form an expert on archery, but, and believe me, the one time in high school when I had to do archery as part of gym class, I was lucky that I hit the target once on the very edge. But the thing is, I have a basic understanding of physics, and that is all it is required to understand that that stuff is bull. Okay, let me see here. All right, let's Oh yeah, there was one character that only had a minor role in this episode that I did want to talk about, and I did like that they took a moment to have Tommy sort of talk with Laurel about, like, hey, we've been banging. Let's not let Oliver find out about it. Now, obviously, the rule of drama states that Oliver has to find out about this. But I did like that they're continuing to show that, yeah, he's kind of a Casanova, but Tommy does genuinely care for Oliver. And he wants what's best for him. So I like that. They're helping to, it helps make Tommy a more well-rounded character. Now, oh yeah, one other thing that I forgot to mention: the scene at Oliver's grave. I'm sorry, Oliver at the grave of his father. That little speech he gives about how, in order to do what you wanted me to do, I'm going to have to dishonor your memory. You know, that actually I thought was a very, very smart scene. Now, if you've read comics like I have, you've probably seen more than a few scenes with Bruce Wayne at his parents' grave. And you know what? I don't think I've ever seen a scene where he said something like that. Because, in a way, that really is what he has to do. People think that Bruce Wayne is a buffoon, that he's a disgrace to the Wayne name. And to the best of my knowledge, or at least in my reading of Batman comics, which is reasonably extensive, we've never really seen Bruce go there and say to him, you know, Dad, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to make the entire city feel that you should be ashamed of me in order to do what it is I need to do in order to protect Gotham. Again, it's a smart scene, and it's a scene that rings emotionally true, and in terms of storytelling, rings true. And that is really about all you can ask for writing on a TV show or a movie or anything. Let me see here. Okay, now we get some more mythology stuff. Let's talk about what happens on the island. First of all, okay, big shocker that the journal was blank. Now, I'm like you. I'm sure after what happened last episode, we all assumed that, you know, his dad had written us all down. But if you stop and think about it, is kind of a confession / list of your enemies really something that most people would carry around in their pockets with them? No. So the question, of course, becomes, who wrote that? And of course, there's the big question of who's the other person on the island. Well, I think if you're a fan of the comics, or if you were just paying very close attention to the first episode, you probably have a pretty good idea who that other Archer is. Speaking of which, I do like, in terms of storytelling and characterization, that they had Oliver refuse to just dump his father's body overboard, even though he was, you know, slowly, practically dying in that life raft. And if you even look closely during the scene with him, you know, chasing the seagulls away, there's stuff on the jacket that on his father's clothes that most likely was maggots. I mean, I looked very carefully. I didn't see anything moving, but I'm sure that's probably what it was intended to be. So just the fact that Oliver refused to leave his, you know, toss his father's body over the side, he insisted on keeping it with him, even when he was almost dead, just so that he could give his father a proper burial. Man, that gives you some real insight into just why it is that Oliver did have the willpower to ultimately become the man he did. And remember, this is before he's gotten to the island. Hasn't got any training. It's just his sheer stubborn refusal to not just to make sure that his father gets a proper burial. And, that's a real testament, as I said, to his character. But anyway, folks, that's all that I have for you this time around. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And, of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. So until next time, take care and have a good one.